has regarding his thesis. And Tony's thesis is entitled Public Archaeology and Cultural Heritage Management in Belize, Successes and Shortcomings. And as we normally do in these defenses, Tony will have some time to present his research and the results of that research. And then after that, we will open it up for questions from anyone in the audience. And after that is over, then we will have, we will ask the audience to, to either mute their, their video. And then the committee that is made up of Dr. Lalok and Dr. Vasquez and myself as chair. And then the committee will have the opportunity to ask 20 questions, starting with Dr. Vasquez, who is the third member of the committee, followed by Dr. Lalok, and then followed by myself. And then after we finish doing that, the committee will confer with each other, and we will ask Tony to recuse himself of that, for a short while. And it's going to be a little tricky because we're doing this on Zoom, but I do have WhatsApp, and I can call Tony and tell him to, to come back online so that we, the committee, can then inform him of our collective decision. So, without any more ado, Tony, it's all yours.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. Hello to everyone in Belize and all of my friends and colleagues in the US who are tuning in. My research focuses on three major questions. I want to look at the cultural heritage management institutions in Belize and what they do to execute heritage education, the outreach efforts that are expended by archaeological projects in Belize and what they mean and how they work, and how these combined efforts help to inform the Belizean cultural identity. Now, just to give you a background of Belize, this is a map of the Caribbean and where Belize is. You can see it's a tiny nation right under Mexico, next to Guatemala. This is the map of Belize. It's a very small country with just under 420,000 people, multiple languages spoken, with English, Spanish, and Creole being the most dominant. And Creole is an English-based Creole. And Belize is also a multi-ethnic nation, and this is something very important. What you're looking at is specifically Western Belize, which I will focus on the most, and this map has only a few of the archaeological sites in the area. There are hundreds more. So to give you a background of archaeological research in Belize and how that has changed over time, Belize has been the focus of archaeological research as far back as the 1890s. And it was just around that time that the first ever ordinance was passed in then British Honduras called the Ancient Monuments Protection Ordinance. And this focused on any archaeological resources that were available on Crown land, so owned by the Crown. So if you had anything on your private property, it belonged to you. In 1928, the Antiquities Ordinance was enacted. And this is the first time where you could not really export any monuments out of the country unless you had, unless the governor of Belize signed on to it. This is also around the first time when the first trained archaeologist, Sir Eric Thompson, came to Belize and started to work in Belize. It was not until 1957, a long time after that, Belize got its first Department of Archaeology in 1957 with A.H. Anderson, a non-Belizean, being the first archaeological commissioner. in 1971, that's when we had the first Belizean archaeological commissioner, Dr. Joseph Palacio. He himself was not an archaeologist. And in 1960s, the laws were revised. So now all archaeological resources, all artifacts, all monuments fell under the property of the Crown. And I use the word the Crown because at this time, Belize was still a colony of Great Britain. In 1970, the Ancient Monuments and Antiquities Ordinance was drafted and enacted, and that still informs the laws that we use today. In 1988, we get the first ever Belizean lead of an archaeological project. Then Jaime Awe started the Belize Valley Archaeological Reconnaissance at Cajalpech. You can see him back in the Stone Age in this picture here. And thanks to the work that he did and the boom in archaeological research in Belize at this time, Belize moves from being on the edge of Maya research to being an important locus. So no longer is Belize just on the periphery, it's an important part and it's an important location to understand how the Maya developed. And because of all of this research, a lot of reserves were opened in Belize, and this greatly impacted tourism into Belize. And anyone who knows Belize will know that 1 in 4 people in Belize has a job that is related to tourism. Heritage research in Belize really took off until the late 90s. That's not to say that people were not doing anything heritage-wise, but in terms of writing about it or investigating it, it didn't really start until about 1999 when Geraldine Dion did some work in the Belize district. Her work was very limited because she only focused on one village near the reserve of Alton Ha. And she also then interviewed the then commissioner, Dr. Alan Moore. What she found out at this time was that outreach was almost non-existent. There wasn't a lot of information out there for people to access besides pamphlets that were made for tourism, or if people wrote about the archaeological reserves in tourist magazines. There was little to no interaction with education then. The department was not really active in schools. And the projects that came to Belize were not really heavily focused on any kind of outreach whatsoever. In the 2000s, there was more work done. Alicia Ebbett McGill did work in the Belize district, focusing on 2 Creole villages. And what she was looking at was how archaeological research informs education in those villages because they were nearby an archaeological site that had an active archaeological project. Dion returned in 2016 to follow up on what she did in 1999. She expanded her research by going to all 6 districts in the country. However, she had some setbacks. She first went to the south of Belize, where she assumed that because she went to the village of Aguacate with a friend of hers who knew the people, that they would also embrace her, and that was not the case. So not understanding the nuances of Belizean culture, that put her at a disadvantage. She talks about going to many towns and villages, and the people were not very receptive. In some cases, they are mistrustful of anthropologists just going about doing research. But eventually some people warmed up to her, and what she found out was people have a generally positive attitude towards archaeology and heritage. And people of various ethnic backgrounds are very proud of their heritage and also embrace Maya history as their own. And this is something important. However, as in 1999, there is still the general distrust of archaeologists, particularly in the south of Belize. In 2017, because of some questions that were raised at the Belize Archaeology Symposium, McCurdy et al. Published a paper on the history of work between archaeologists and the community of San Jose Zacautz in Western Belize. That village has worked with people who work at the site of Xunantunich for a very, very long time. So this was a very important article. It shows a very long history. In 2020, Harrison Buck publishes an article in Heritage Journal highlighting the work that she did in the village of Crooked Tree and the multivocal approaches that she used in this village and the establishment of a museum in that village that reflects Maya history and Creole history of that village, and how archaeology has also helped to shape their identity. And then in that same journal, Hogarth et al. And et al. Also being the three gentlemen you see on screen, Dr. Jaime Awe, Rafael Guerra, and myself contributed to an article that features BVAR's 30-year record on heritage management and also outreach in Belize. It is very extensive. If you haven't read the journal, I suggest you do. It's pretty impressive and a long list. Now, the approach that I use in terms of theory was trying to look at what people or how people define what public archaeology is. It differs from archaeologist to archaeologist. It differs from era to era. Some people, for them, it really goes more with cultural resource management, and that was what was coined in 1972 in regards to salvaging sites that were in danger of being destroyed because of development here in the US. But really, it goes back more to the 1950s. British archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler spoke about the need for the common man to have access to archaeological knowledge. And that is pretty much the general theme and idea and definition that a lot of archaeologists use, is that public archaeology is where practice and scholarship meets the world. It's all about education. It's ethical because it's where archaeology is made accessible to the public, and archaeologists have the, I guess, the ethical requirement to share what they know with the non-archaeologists in a way that the non-archaeologists can understand. In terms of the methods that I used, I did surveys and interviews. All of these were IRB approved. The surveys that I used 3 different versions. All of them were placed online and shared on social media. We had one for Belizeans who are 18 and over across the country of Belize, one that is just for tour guides, and another one for foreign archaeological students who have worked in Belize. I believe that all of these 3 subgroups can really help to contribute to the knowledge of cultural heritage management in Belize. No identifying features were really taken except for where these people live in Belize, because that, I believe, impacts their responses. And you can see on the screen some of the examples of the questions that I uses for the 3 different subgroups. In terms of the interviews were semi-structured and also open-ended. So some of the questions that I used were leading, and each different subgroup that I interviewed had a different set of questions, but I left it open, and the responses also helped to prompt me to figure out what to ask them next. All of the interviews were recorded so that when I transcribed them, that they were fairly accurate. And this was the only, it was only during the interviews that I had to ask them for their consent to record, and also to use identifying features such as their names, their ethnicity, and their culture, and also to use their images if and when I had to, and everyone agreed, fortunately. Now, before I get into the cultural heritage management of Belize, just to give you an idea of what cultural heritage means for Belize based on the interviews and the surveys. So generally, cultural heritage in Belize is about self-identification and how Belizeans view themselves. And it's a combination of 2 identifiers, ethnicity and culture. Culture for most people in Belize are about their traditions, their history, and also their speech. Ethnicity is about their ancestry, their skin color, but also their speech. So there are some things that go in both culture and ethnicity, and some things that are specific to both. Cultural heritage is both tangible and intangible, and most people viewed the tangible portion as the archaeological heritage in Belize, and the intangible as the living cultures in Belize. And both of them are things that are inherited and passed on from one generation to the next. And in the case of intangible culture, it is something that evolves and has changed over time. Ethnicity and culture, ethnicity does not always reflect culture. And what I mean by this is you can be born into a specific ethnicity, but that does not reflect the culture that you are. And in the photo here, a colleague of mine, Felicia, ethnically, she views herself as being mestizo. So she has, that's a mix of Spanish and Maya. However, where she grew up and where she lived was predominantly Creole. So that's what she grew up understanding, and that's the culture that she identifies with. So in some cases, the lines between ethnicity and culture tend to be blurred. And there are certain ethnic and cultural traits that are very specific to a culture, but are also embraced by Belize in general and have formed part of the Belizean identity. Perhaps the most identifying one being Creole, the language, because pretty much everyone across the entire country, regardless of your ethnic background, speaks and understands Creole. Rice and beans, which is classified as a Creole dish, is also eaten by everyone. Punta is a Garifuna cultural dance, but is also pretty much a Belizean dance, and everyone knows how to do it. And in terms of the archaeological reserves, it is something that is embraced by most Belizeans as part of their shared cultural heritage and their history. Now, cultural heritage management is largely carried out by one major institution, the National Institute of Culture and History, which was formed in 2003. Before this, the different facets of cultural heritage were managed by different organizations under different ministries. So what Niche did was to bring all of these under one organization into 4 different sister institutions. The Institute for Creative Arts, or ICA, they are responsible for all artistic expression. So everything from dance, theater. They also have under their purview the Belize Film Commission and the National Youth Orchestra and Choir, and they are housed at the Belize Center for Performing Arts in Belize City. And they have like every year they have the International Film Festival, and this and I mean pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, this will continue, and also things like national song competitions that they host every single year. The Museum of Belize and the Houses of Culture, they exhibit a culture through different exhibits of prehistoric and historic period objects, and also current culture. And they are housed at a refurbished prison. And under the purview of the Museum of Belize, there are also 7 houses of culture that are spread across the country that act as mini museums in the major towns. And these houses of culture are very active in their respective towns in terms of celebrating the cultures and history of those towns. This is the prison, Her Majesty's Prison in Belize City before and after it was refurbished into the Museum of Belize. And that's what it looks like inside. You can see the gates that existed back then. And this is the old San Ignacio Hospital in Belize, which was refurbished into the San Ignacio House of Culture, and the old government house in Belize City, which was refurbished into the Belize City House of Culture. So a lot of old buildings with really great history are refurbished for these purposes. The Institute for Social and Cultural Research They are responsible for promoting to retrieve, supervise, document, and carry out historical, social, cultural, and anthropological research in Belize. So they are the sister institution that the Institute of Archaeology works closest with, because we work in very similar ways. Every single year, they have the Belize National Research Conference, where they highlight all of the anthropological and historical research that takes place in Belize. Under them, they also formed the Belize History Association. They're responsible for intangible cultural heritage, and they also ended up opening another sub-institution called the Goldson House for Democracy and Patriotism. So this is an image of the Belize National Research Conference. It used to be part of the Belize Archaeology Symposium. Both conferences were merged into one called the Belize Archaeological and Anthropological Symposium, but they eventually broke off and did their own thing. IICR is very active at informing the public about very important facets of our history. For example, the history and evolution of the Belize flag, aspects that deal with slavery. And one of their most successful initiatives is to look at Belizean heroes and patriots of going as far back, even to people who are still alive. And they go around the country utilizing the different houses of culture to have these exhibits. They're also very active now on social media with these history bites. And this really picked up during COVID, when they couldn't really be out, but they continued to educate the people about the history of Belize. They signed on to the 2003 UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. And what they do is they're actively documenting the cultures, the traditions of the many ethnic groups in Belize, everything from the festivals to the celebrations and holidays. The Goldson House is open to the public, and it highlights one of Belize's greatest heroes, who is very involved in the democracy of Belize. So they took the house that he used to live in and turned it into a museum about his life. As you can see, that's my colleague. She's explaining to my supervisor, Dr. Alan Moore, the history and life of Philip Goldson. They have had great success with their conference, but perhaps most importantly is the success that they have had in training other Belizeans how to document intangible cultural heritage across the country of Belize. This is a workshop that they have every so often to train more people in how to document cultures using video, using audio, and even how to document historical items and artifacts. They have also been very successful in the publications that they have done, such as the proceedings from their conference, but they also have a walkthrough series, which I'll get to. This is Felicia training Belizeans how to document intangible cultural heritage. But the walkthrough series looks at all of the major towns in Belize, and it is a historical walkthrough. So by having this book, you can go to many places within that town, and it will give you a history of that town and of that building. They have had some challenges, especially in how to strike a balance between what a community wants and what the institution wants. And this can cause some frictions at time, because you kind of want to please both. You want to please the people that you work with, but you also want to make sure that you are fulfilling the goals of your institution. They've also had some challenges because a lot of people still don't know who IICR is and what they do, because they're still a relatively new institution. They're also perhaps the smallest institution within it, so they don't have a great human resource. And they also lack a lot of the financial resource to carry out a lot of the initiatives that they have planned. However, they believe that by working with people, they can overcome a lot of this. And here in this image, you can see my ISCR colleague talking to people, and they believe that by forming these bonds and working with people that you can overcome the shortage of human and financial resources. The Institute of Archaeology and their mandate and mission is to research, to protect, preserve, and sustainably manage Belize's cultural and archaeological resources. And IA is under the mandate of the National Institute of Culture and History Act, which is essentially the 1970 Ancient Monuments and Antiquities Ordinance. And this basically states that any ancient monument, wherever situated on land, underwater, under the sea, in a cave, is vested in the state, whereas previously it was vested in the crown, but Belize got independence, now it's in the state, which also means for the people of Belize. A monument is any building that has been erected or transformed or reworked by humankind, regardless of where it is situated in Belize. And this refers to monuments from ancient history and also from recent history. Antiquities, any article that has been manufactured, reworked, or modified by humankind of any substance or any part of a substance, and also belonging to the ancient Maya or any culture that is 100 years or older. And these are also vested in the state and for the people of Belize. Now, the Institute of Archaeology has three main sections that they are divided into: the parks management, policy and planning, and research and education. Parks management has the responsibility for the upkeep of all the archaeological sites, and this is important because it is these sites are open for tourism, which funds a lot of the work that the IA and NICH does generally. They're also responsible for the upkeep of the infrastructure and amenities at the sites. These reserves function as open-air museums and classrooms, so it's important to keep them in a state that people can come and visit. And on the screen, you see 4 examples of the reserves that we have open. 3 of them are surface sites, 1 is a cave, 3 of them are ancient Maya, and 1 is a historic site in Belize. And these are some of the examples of the things that the parks management are responsible for, everything from cleaning to tourist interaction. Policy and planning, they take care of any laws regarding archaeology in Belize, keeping the reserves open, marketing the sites for events, and also the creating and signing of any MOUs between our governments and others. This is one of the events that was heavily marketed by the policy and planning section in 2012 when everyone thought the world was going to end and we decided to go out with a bang, much to our dismay the following morning when the world didn't end and we had to do cleanup with a hangover. But we had a pretty nice party, and hopefully in the future we get to do something like this again. Marketing our sites for people to get married. So for those of you watching, for future, if you want a picture like this, you can go get married at one of our reserves in Belize. So if you end up getting divorced, at least the picture lasts forever and it's beautifully done. And also signing of MOUs. This is a signing between the government of Belize and it and the State Department of the US government to curb illicit trafficking in Belize. Research and education, that's the section that I work in. And we are responsible for a lot of initiatives. So I could never ever list every single one of them here. Educational outreach, of course, is the most important. We do this in schools and many other public venues, heavily utilizing social media now. The annual Belize Archaeology Symposium, very important, and the consequent publication of the research papers from that symposium. We also help to arrange all of the archaeological research that is done in Belize by the permits that researchers need to work in Belize. They care for and the curation of the national collection, so all the artifacts that are for Belize. Also, we help to work with private citizens and help them to get their own collections, and also inspecting looting and site destruction across Belize. Outreach happens in many places. So we go to schools across the entire country. Schools call us, we come in, but we also go to many other venues. So if there is arts in the park, for example, they will call us, we will come and have a booth. If there is, if a private organization has a meeting and they want us to come in and talk about cultural heritage, for example, then we will come in and do this. Like I said, we do a lot of active work on social media. We get people involved with the work that we do. For example, International Archaeology Day, where we have various contests for people. And also now with COVID, the IA is very active at continuing to educate people about the reserves and about archaeology in Belize, such as something like this. Something, a simple blurb like this helps us to continue our outreach and to help educate people in how to write a Maya date, for example. These are some of the permits that we issue to anyone who wants to conduct research in Belize. For example, anyone who comes to Belize has to get a license to excavate, and they have to have a copy of this license on them at all times. That is something that the IA issues. And at the end of their excavations field work, if they want to export any samples or any artifacts for further analysis, then all of that also gets done through the IA. The Belize Archaeology Symposium, pre-COVID, has been happening for quite a while, and the every single year gets more and more attendance. You see a poster for one of our sessions and a cover for one of the volumes that is then published every single year. It reaches a lot of people. The increase in the Belizean audience is impressive. We got a lot more Belizeans coming in, tour guides, students, and the general public who are curious to know what is going on in the country. This is a perfect venue for it. The IA is also responsible, like I said, for taking care of the national collection, everything from photographing to assessing and documenting everything we have, whether it's in Belize or even as part of traveling exhibits abroad. This is myself and my colleague Sylvia, both installing the exact same vessel at an exhibit that has been traveling around the US for quite a while. And one of the conditions of this loan from the IA is that the artifacts are deinstalled and reinstalled by Belizean hands. And so one of the things that we allow in Belize that is not done, I guess, here in the US is that we allow people to have their own collections. They don't own it, but they, as I put in quotes, possess. So because people find artifacts all across the country, sometimes if they're plowing a field, they come across things or they inherit things, we allow people to have these things and to curate them for us. This way we get to know exactly what's in the country, and they are responsible for taking care of this. It gives the regular Belizean person a sense of pride that they are a custodian of part of Belizean history. And of course, we're also, the Research and Education Department is also responsible for the inspection of destruction and looting across the country. And it happens in this image, you see a small structure that was destroyed, and it happens more often than not because sometimes people just don't see it, or they also claim ignorance of the law. So some of the challenges that the IA faces, this quote by Dr. Awe really reflects a lot of the challenges that the IA and niche as a whole faces. You know, we have very limited human and financial resources, and that kind of puts a monkey wrench into a lot of the plans that we have. And my colleague Sylvia, her quote is that we want to protect archaeology and keep it in this bubble, but who are we keeping it safe for, if not for the people of Belize? So one of the things that archaeology faces is that there is a disconnect with the people of Belize. As far as successful as we are with outreach, there is still a disconnect. Most of the interaction that we have with the IA has is we go to schools. So we target a very young audience, and this is great. But we lack interaction with more adults. We lack interaction with certain villages that may be too far for us to access. And one of the things that we don't do is that we don't really cater to the interests that these adults may have. And there's also the lasting negative legacy of archaeology in Belize that still exists to this day, where people are very distrusting of archaeologists and archaeology in general. There's also interference from politics in Belize. Anyone who's Belizean knows that politics pervades almost every aspect of our lives, and archaeology is no different. And so sometimes certain ministers might try to intervene on behalf of one of their constituents when it comes to looting and site destruction. We've also had some difficulty increasing the penalties and fines for destruction and for the selling of antiquities in Belize because of the interference from politics. And unfortunately, as I said, there's still these misconceptions in the public. For example, if someone finds an artifact, they think that we will compensate them financially for it, and this is not the case. So many Belizeans get mad, and there's ignorance of the law when it comes to site destruction and also the looting and selling of antiquities. As I said, the students and young people are our largest audience. The adults that we target mostly are tour guides, and there's still that distrust for archaeologists. And this comes because back in the early days of archaeology in Belize, most of the expeditions that came to Belize were for the purpose of finding artifacts to retrieve them and take them back and place them in museums. And in the case of working with the Department of Archaeology in the early days, there was this, what they used to do is you found anything that you found, you had half, we had half. So these are what we found, one for you, one for us, one for you, one for us. And a lot of people think that this is how things still operate. As you can see, this is a ball court marker from one of our sites that is currently outside of Belize. And a lot of the artifacts from Belize are still outside the country, but a lot of this happened previous to 1970s. So legally, it belongs to whoever has it. And there is still, like I said, interference from politics. In 2013, we had a very global embarrassment of the destruction of this pyramid at the site of Nomul in northern Belize. And the perpetrator not only ran for office, but really also wasn't heavily fined. And whenever we do a lot of public outreach, people still ask us to this day, what happened to this case and was the perpetrator fined? And as you can see, people are still ignorant of the law. This is from a Facebook page in Belize Buy and Sell, where people are selling artifacts. And one of the comments you can see is, it is illegal to sell artifacts, and the person is like, it's not mine, I'm just doing a favor. So there's still ignorance of the law in terms of selling and buying artifacts. And also because people are not really prosecuted for it, there are no warnings set, there are no examples being made. We also have a very small staff. The small staff stops us from being in more places at once. So if 2 schools call us on the same day to do outreach, it may be impossible. It also affects how we monitor looting and destruction across the country, because Belize is small, but some of these places are very hard to get to. One of the things that we also don't do is we have about anywhere from 15 to 20 projects that work in Belize every year. And the Institute for Archaeology should be visiting these projects to check on them, but because we lack transportation, this also doesn't happen. We also lack very good communication with other organizations. Even within the IA, between the different departments, there's a lack of communication. And this causes friction. We don't work very well together, or something happens and they don't inform the other department. We have issues with ourselves and ISCR. So if there's an event happening, or if there's something happening in government and ISCR is doing something that we should be doing, there's no communication. Or if there is, then we're not being told about it. With the Ministry of Education, for example, we are also having miscommunications. With the University of Belize, we are having miscommunications, and these are organizations that the IA should be working very closely with, so that they can be involved in every facet of cultural heritage management. We also have the unfortunate aspect of improper storage for the national collection, which I will get to in a bit. As you can see, looting and destruction happens across the country. Some of these places are very hard to get to. So artifacts are strewn all over, structures are being destroyed, and sometimes if we cannot get there on time because we have no transportation, then these communities who do the reporting might think or come to the conclusion that the Institute does not care, and then will not report future events. Because even at the archaeological reserves, we don't have a large enough staff to be monitoring every single aspect. So even at the reserves, for example, here at Cahalpech, you can see people are scratching graffiti into the structures, which is unfortunate, especially in a case like this, where they're actually scratching into original plaster and red pigment. And as you can see also, graffiti on structures at an open reserve. When I spoke about issues regarding ISCR and the Ministry of Education, I talk about the Belizean Studies concern. Belizean Studies is a new initiative. It's a 4-year program, and it's taking the place of social studies within the classrooms of Belize. And they're now having a small section that focuses specifically on archaeological history, but the IA had no real input on this. Instead, ISCR became the point institution for dealing with this. And this all came about because there was miscommunication. The Ministry of Education tried to get in touch with the IA, but emails were not answered, calls were not responded. The ISCR eventually did this, and it's unfortunate because we want any educational initiative in Belize to portray as accurate information as we can. But if there's lacking communication, then the IA does not have really good involvement in this. The NICH signed an MOU with UB in Belize, but once again, IA has no real input in what is being taught in the history class in Belize. And in speaking to my colleagues at the IA, Jose Ramos said it's just for the optics. So a lot of these things that are being done, a lot of the agreements that are being signed, it's really good for the image of NICH and for the image of the IA. But when it comes to the actual work of implementing it, it's just not being carried out. And when it comes to issues of storage, like I said, the IA unfortunately cannot really visit a lot of these projects that are coming in. So we cannot assess how they are storing their artifacts, which led to also another public outcry from 2013, where a storage room was unfortunately vandalized, and untold bags of ceramic shards were strewn all over. And this is unfortunate, and it's something that we did not know, and we probably wouldn't have known if someone did not report this to us, but because we're not inspecting these things, we don't know. And in terms of the national collection, our storage is reaching capacity, and a lot of these artifacts are stored in very improper conditions, and it is unfortunate. And a lot of these things are aspects that the IA has to work on and to change, because archaeological projects will keep on coming to Belize, and more artifacts will continue to be unearthed. Despite all of this, the IA can celebrate some success. They reach thousands of Belizeans every year, from school visits, exhibits, the Belize Archaeology Symposium, and also, despite some miscommunications with IACR, we work very well along with them and with the Houses of Culture. Whenever they have an event, they will contact us. We are part of that, so we reach our, a wider audience. And the anti-looting campaign has had some success by us working with law officials and training them how to identify artifacts, real from fake. There's been an increase in the amount of reporting and the increase in amount of Belizeans who are applying to have their own collections. In terms of the educational outreach, there are many lectures that we have, many different subjects, as you can see, everything from the ancient Maya to Maya versus Egyptians, heritage management, careers in archaeology, or if there's something specific that you want the IA to talk about, they create tailored lectures for you. And one of the things that the IA has done over the last couple of years is to combine lectures with artifact displays. This is very important for the people of Belize, because Belizean people are very tactile. If they can hold an artifact in their hand, they develop a closer connection to it. And I know the idea of holding an artifact or touching it may cause many people to shudder in fear, like they're touching these things. But we have pieces that we know will not be destroyed if held by Belizean people. And this is important to them, and it helps us to create a deeper impact. And we also discuss anti-looting and the laws at every single lecture throughout the school. So it is so essentially it's many different lectures combined into one. And you can, as you can see, you know, the simple act of having a young Belizean person wear a jade necklace, for example, really creates a lasting impact and will help them to get connected to their past. And it doesn't matter what ethnic group you are, it is still a part of your history. And that is something that we try to instill in every single Belizean that we meet. We are at any single event, whatever the event, whatever the public, whatever the venue, the IA shows up with exhibits, with a lecture to make sure that we increase our audience. And working well with IACR, like I said, we hit a very wide audience. One of the initiatives that the IA is working on is to also increase outreach by having interns come and work for the IA. This is a recent initiative that was done by Research and Education to teach interns how to catalog artifacts, how to process artifacts. Here we have some students washing and processing ceramic shards, and how to document artifacts. And it doesn't matter if you are adult or extremely young adult. And we have interns that also come in to help us to process artifacts for exportation. So every single aspect of the work that the IA does, we are bringing interns in to work along with us. This is how we get young people interested in archaeology and possibly creating future archaeologists in the process. The BAS is a great place, like I said, for interaction. These are tour guides who come almost every single year. It's a great place for Belizeans to interact with archaeologists on a personal basis. And these are many of my friends in this picture who come in and are very active in being a part of the audience and engaging with archaeologists on a one-on-one basis. These are covers for some of the research reports that are published every single year and available to the public a year later. One of our anti-looting posters that we take across the country. The anti-looting campaign is something that we have really picked up by going onto media, social media, TV, and radio to remind people and to educate them about the laws of Belize regarding looting and destruction. And by working along with law officials, the police, the army, customs, these are sometimes the first organizations to come across looting, to come across destruction. So they also act as the eyes and ears for the Institute of Archaeology. So we talk to them and we train them how to spot real from fake and what to do if they ever come across a looted structure or if they come across someone trying to buy or sell antiquities. And like I said, anywhere there is a festival going on, we will show up to talk about, archaeology in Belize. The signing of MOUs between our government and the government of the US, which initially was done in 2013 and renewed in 2018, has really helped to curb illicit trafficking. So now if anything is found online, for example, being sold in the US, we can get in touch with the State Department. They will investigate. And if proven that it comes from Belize, the person will be prosecuted and the artifacts will be repatriated. And also very successfully, Dr. Awe, when he was the head of archaeology in Belize, applied for the US Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation. And this is very important because a lot of restorative work was done on certain sites in Belize, and 2 new reserves were opened for the public. Serpent Sugar Mill, for example, was conserved and opened for the public. This is one of our historic sites in Belize. The salvage and restoration of the Benque Viejo Archaeological Reserve, which is also called BVAR, if you look at it. This was done in the town of Benque Viejo. And as you can see, it's really, really well done, and it's smack in the center of town. And this, Santa Rita Corozal, this is a structure that was conserved because it was really being destroyed by the encroaching town around it. And all of this was done because the communities approached Dr. Awe and said, these sites are being destroyed, is anything we can do? He applied for the grants very successfully and used these grants to conserve the sites that are now part of Belizean history. And this one is, for example, is very important because this one is now the venue, once again, pre-COVID, hopefully post-COVID, for the reenactment of the first wedding ever between a Maya princess and a Spanish pirate, which is done on that very same structure. And this is a very important moment for Belizean history because it's also the birth of the mestizo culture. Sylvia made a very important point. We seem to think that because we are an authority on the topic of archaeology, people will listen to us. So one more further recommendation that we can make for the Institute of Archaeology is to really tailor specific presentations. She gave the example of a farmer who came in to the Institute to bring artifacts. And he was very interested in discussing ancient Maya farming techniques. And it was a great discussion until the topic was shifted to ancient Maya religion, and then he lost interest. So knowing your audience is very important. If you go into a village, for example, and the women are interested in Maya ceramics, you discuss Maya ceramics. They may not want to know farming techniques. If you go into a farming community, there's no need to speak about ceramics. They're interested in farming. So, knowing your audience is very important in increasing your outreach. And also, having more effective internship programs can take care of staff shortage in terms of outreach, in terms of getting your artifacts processed and cataloged. you can create these initiatives with the different educational organizations across Belize and make something official, so that maybe the students who participate get some kind of credits for it. Archaeological projects work in Belize. I'll touch very briefly on this. Dr. Annabelle Ford, for example, has been working in Belize for a long time. As far back as 1983, she recalls setting up a slideshow to show the people, the locals who were working with her, because she wanted them to see themselves in that role, that the people from that village were the ones doing the work. She is very big in working along with people, and for her, she believes that heritage is reciprocal. So they can learn from her and the archaeology, and she can learn about culture and the cultural nuances by working with the people of Belize. By working at the site of El Pilar, half of which is in Belize, half of which is in Guatemala, very interesting site. She has, her work mostly focuses on what she calls archaeology under the canopy. And so what she does is you can see a lot of the structures are left unexcavated. She believes that it's more immersive for whoever visits El Pilar to, I guess, create their own experience. And a lot of the work that she has done really focuses on Maya forest gardening. So you can see this is her at the site. Some of the structures have been conserved, but most of it remains the way it is, pretty much uncovered. For her, the work that she's really interested in is working with the forest gardeners. A long time ago, she helped to establish Amigos de El Pilar, and they have been very active in educating the people of that village about the forest, about the plants that were important not just to the Maya, but also to people who live there now, and how these plants are used. She also helped to publish a book for children about these plants, and to create a network around the site for Maya forest gardeners, for people who may want to visit and see what the work that it is that they do. For example, here you see children learning about the important plants that the Maya used back then and continue to use. This, unfortunately, may not be as successful as she wanted to be, but it is still a very good initiative that hopefully will continue to catch steam. Here's a map of the Maya forest gardens around the site of El Pilar up here, and this is a coloring book that she helped to create about the Maya forest garden, which first she did in English and then eventually did a Spanish version for children in Belize and also for those across the border. But most recently, and I think this is very interesting, what she helped to do is to create an exhibit called Chaya. And what she did is to take Maya artifacts and show them in the context of maybe how they were used, but also to show, and unfortunately I didn't get an image of this, but also show the utensils that we would use now and how they would equate in what the Maya used then, in terms of vessels that were basic, vessels that were for the elite, and also for people living today, like maybe having a normal plate that you eat on and a plate that you would serve for a special occasion. And then we get to Bivar. As I said, the first project to have a Belizean at its helm started in 1988 as a response to looting at Cahalpech. Dr. Awe helped to demarcate the boundary of Cahalpech and get it established as a reserve. But with one of the major goals was to establish this site for tourism and to create a guidebook for use in schools and tourism. This is what it looked like then. Here it is today. Very, very impressive. But even from back then, Dr. Awe has been very active in making sure that the public were involved in the work that he does. This is him educating students then, educating students now. So as you can see, he has not stopped, really believing that a public component is important. He is a very important person to emulate in that respect. He teaches many things, from how to be a very good drinker, how to feed and take care of homeless graduate students. He's very good in fieldwork excavations, but also knows how to change a tire if and when you need to. So being well-rounded is very important. And since then, BVAR has expanded its roster to include many sites, some of them that became reserves as a result. BVAR has published more theses than any other project in Belize, has trained more Belizeans than any other projects in Belize, and BVAR graduates have gone on to form their own projects in Belize. This is a picture of Dr. Awe, and next to him is Dr. Alan Moore, who was trained under BVAR and went on to get his PhD. Rafael Guerra, who was trained under BVAR and is very close to getting his PhD. Jose Ramos, who was trained under BVAR and now works for the Institute of Archaeology. Myself, trained under BVAR, about to get my master's. And Jorge Can, trained under BVAR and is the conservator for the Institute of Archaeology. So all of the conservation work is done by him. And he also trains other Belizeans in that process. So BVAR can boast a pretty incredible record. BVAR under Dr. Awe has helped to publish books about the Maya in Belize, training tour guides, helping different groups in Belize get in touch with their history and culture. For example, these are two of the books that Dr. Awe has published, and there are lots more. I can only give you a small sample of the work that they do. Training tour guides in Belize. This is a shot of a women's group. Dr. Awe helped them to learn techniques that ancient Maya used, how they made and treated ceramics, and now these women are creating incredible replicas. He helped them to get access to actual slate that the Maya were using, and through interaction with these groups, slate carvings are now big business for tourism, and as you can see, incredibly well done. And most importantly, through BVAR, training young Belizeans in archaeological field methods, which is very, very important, as you can see. And an offshoot of some of these projects, there's now an NGO, and what they have done is that they have these initiatives that bring together many different groups who come together and really work well with the public. This group was formed because some archaeologists working in Belize felt that they weren't doing enough, they weren't having enough interaction with the public, so they created this organization to work with the public. And one of the greatest initiatives they have is to have an archaeological fair every single year, bringing together many different archaeological projects and educational organizations and cultural organizations to really highlight what archaeology does in Belize as a way to give back to the public. They also, and this is very important for some archaeological students, especially the foreign students who come to Belize, because in some cases, this is the only public interaction that they have. And for the student featured here, he said that this was the best experience of his entire time in Belize because he got to work with the public and experience Belizean culture. They also published a book that is about young people set back in the ancient Maya days. What's really impressive here is that it's done in 3 languages, Maya, Spanish, and English in this book. And not only was it published, but it also became an audiobook. Now, why is working on projects important for Belizean people? This has been going on for a while. It's not new. And archaeological projects is a great way for Belizeans to feel connected to who they are, to their history, and helps to give them a stronger cultural identity. And here I introduce Frank, introduced to Dr. Awe at the Belize Archaeology Symposium, and since then has worked with BVAR and also with my friends down in Stan Creek, learning not only about ceramic styles and epigraphy, and it helped him to reconnect to who he is. As you can see, Frank is now helping to create his own ceramics. He really, really is passionate about epigraphy. He does really beautiful work, but he wanted to know where his people came from, how and why they built the structures they did, what happened to them is still his culture. And by working on these projects, it helped him to reconnect to not only his past, but his present. Julia Arzu, featured here on the left, she was a student, so she got her field work for credits, but she wanted to be someone who would not just read history books, but someday write history books. She is not Maya, but for her, Maya history is part of Belizean history, and thus this is also part of her history. It helps to inform who she is. So by working on a project, she was no longer just an outsider. She had a deeper connection to the work that she was doing. And these are just some of the Belizean students that we have working with us on BVAR. And also, one of the things that they learned is archaeology is not just you show up and you dig. It's very structured. Adrian, for example, thought that archaeology was very, very different, and then showing up, realizing that it's very structured and that there were certain rules. It's very precise, and it's something that he appreciated very, very much. One of the things that many of the students mentioned is that they learned how to use tools. A lot of the aspects that they learned inside the classroom are now put to use. It also teaches them how to work in a team, because archaeology can never be a one-man pursuit. But most importantly, it shakes the stigma that archaeology is a foreign pursuit or foreign enterprise, which is still a stigma that pervades Belize today. As Adrian said, it is a responsibility of archaeologists to teach about what they find. It is their job to educate. So one of the things that I wanted to discuss is how information is disseminated and some of the issues that are occurring in Belize. For example, at the BAS, a lot of the papers are very jargon heavy. The delivery tends to be very mechanical. And if you want to reach the Belizean public, you have to maybe talk in a more conversational tone, very relaxed. Dr. Awe is good at this. Dr. Garber is good at this. They talk to the people like they're having a conversation, which brings in the Belizean to listen. And one of the things that I think a lot of researchers don't understand is that Belizeans are also very shy. We can be very loud, but we're shy. So understanding Belizean nuance may help you to understand why Belizeans don't ask questions. It's not because they're not curious or they don't want to know, but they just don't want to ask. And also getting access to the information. The RBA takes a year to be published. Other journals require subscriptions that you have to pay for, and sometimes Belizeans just can't do that. So it is up to you, the archaeologist, to also provide information to the communities you work in by giving lectures, which Dr. Awe and his team are very good at doing with tour guides. Dr. Yeager is very good at doing Instacuts. And if you don't have any town nearby, find a community to work in. Belizeans really want to know. In terms of cultural heritage and ethnicity, ethnicity is different across Belize. Culture blurs lines in terms of music and food, Belizean identity. All of these come together to help form who we are. I know here in the US, people see cultural appropriation as something evil, but in Belize, we see it as cultural appreciation, where if, and Frank said this, if he sees a non-Maya woman wearing a Maya wipil, he feels pride that their cultures are being celebrated. What the Belizean government did way back in the 1960s was to appropriate Maya history and Maya archaeology to be a Belizean thing. It is the one thing that all ethnic groups now share in common is ancient history. And it is something that we have embraced, whether it is non-Garifuna people embracing Garifuna culture and dance and culture, people in schools celebrating culture and wearing the cultural garbs of other cultures. For us, it's about appreciation. And it's something that we focus on very heavily in schools from when we are children, is to teach the importance of different cultures in Belize. And this alone tells you how important archaeology and archaeological history is for Belize. The jade head, the crown jewel of Belizean artifacts, is featured on Belizean currency. And even though we don't have a history program in Belize, we have social studies. Unfortunately, social studies tends to get lost within the amalgamation of all of these other subjects. History is taught as an elective mostly. And even when they teach history as a part of social studies, they only pick some key moments. So some things are glossed over entirely. And sometimes some of these key moments in history may lack historical accuracy for Belizean students. Archaeology is very important in informing history because it can lend more accuracy to the history that we teach our students, and can also enrich history, both ancient and recent history. But as I said, unfortunately, it is mostly an elective and something that many students never ever have to take, especially in high school, for example. So to wrap up, we have the issues of working within some constraints. We don't have enough people, we don't have enough finances to do the work, but still IA and ICR are very successful in getting a lot of the work done. The IA needs to do some restructuring in some of their efforts in terms of how they address looting and how they go about to decolonize the legacy of archaeology in Belize, and to be more actively involved in what is being taught in the schools. Archaeological projects that visit Belize need to also practice greater inclusion, and maybe to have a component that is very specific for the public. Not only is this a benefit for Belizean students, but it's also a benefit to the visiting students who come. And Belize is multi-ethnic, multicultural, and researchers who come to Belize, it's important to try to understand these cultural nuances, because it will also help to make your research a lot more effective. These are, I want to also thank NAU, Dr. Awe, Dr. Alok, Dr. Vasquez, the Institute for Archaeology, all the people of Belize, and also all the people who helped me to help me get this research off the ground. Thank you very much.
All right. It's quite a long presentation. We didn't expect it was going to go that long, but so because of that, we will open it to questions from the audience, but maybe just for no longer than about 10-15 minutes. So if anyone would like to ask a question from Tony, please do so. But I understand why you ended up doing as long as you did, because obviously you and I have a good sense of heritage management in Belize, but the audience did not. So that was good that you were able to give some historical background. So
I do have one question already. So how widespread is knowledge of the collections, and how are they educated to curate artifacts, and are any artifacts exempt from this law? Knowledge is not very widespread, unfortunately. It is something that I said when we go out to do lectures, we incorporate into what we share, so people can know about the laws of Belize, and that if they have artifacts, they don't need to be scared. We won't take them away. We won't take away the land, but they can register for a collection. It is not something that, unfortunately, I think the Institute talks about enough in the public, like really going more on media to talk about these things. We don't, unfortunately, really train anyone how to curate artifacts. We give them a list of conditions of how to take care of them to keep them safe from burglary or fire, but we don't really train them, which is something that I think really should be incorporated into this. And any artifacts exempt from this law, yes, if anyone finds something that is that is exceptional, that is rare, that we think as the Institute that we should have under, I guess, that we should take care of personally, then we can, by law, I wouldn't say confiscate, but recommend that they hand it over to us. Any other questions? And go on.
Tony, it's Megan.
Hi.
Hi, I got kicked off my computer, so I'm on Sean's computer right now.
So,
I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about the results of your survey. What kind of information came from that?
A lot of the results from the survey were incorporated into this. For example, how people feel about culture, how they define what cultural heritage is, how they view culture versus ethnicity. Generally, as compared to what Dion did in 2016, people still really feel pretty positive about archaeology in Belize. Some of them still feel that archaeology, that they're distrustful towards archaeology. They really feel that Belizeans should have more involvement in archaeological projects. But initially, basically, most of what they did, it was I incorporated into how I define cultural heritage. Many of them don't feel that we need to open more reserves because they know that that opening more reserves leads to more vandalism of structures, as you saw with the stuff happening at Gahalpech. So yeah.
hey, Tony, if I can follow up quickly on Megan's question. Did you find any, I don't know, particular differences, I guess, in the responses of your three audiences that you tackled with the survey?
Yes. Some tour guides want more reserves to be open for obvious reasons. I guess they'll have more places to take tour guides. Tour guides tend to have a deeper understanding of archaeology, but also because it's their bread and butter. It's their business to know. They also have knowledge of where to access archaeological information, as opposed to the Belizean public. For them, they rely on the IA to come to schools, or they rely on, the news or TV programs to teach them, whereas tour guides actively seek out the knowledge themselves. Archaeological students, for the most part, also agreed that there is a need for more Belizean interaction with archaeology and a lot more interaction between themselves and the Belizean public.
Okay, maybe I can add something to that, Sean. One of the new initiatives that my Beaver project is doing, I think Tony touched on the fact that the access to information is hard because, people would have to sign up or get a subscription to journals or even buy the research reports. So I have started to develop an electronic library that we now have thousands and thousands of articles and volumes, et cetera, that we'll be donating to the Institute of Archaeology and to the University of Belize and Galen University, and also to the tour guide associations, so that again, and to schools, so that people will be able to access all this information that's published out there.
Brilliant, thanks.
Yeah, and I apologize for going on so long. Unfortunately, when it's a project that I'm passionate about, I never know when to shut up. With the MOU between the US and Belize, there is active law enforcement to some degree. For example, with customs at the borders and at the airports, because of the training that the IA had with customs, they're more actively seeking out artifacts. And now if they spot something that seems like, kind of iffy, they will call us to come in and intervene. The the laws of the U.S. have they're also very helpful because, like I said, if we spot anything for sale like on eBay, then they can check over here for us and they can prosecute on behalf of the government of the U.S. and then send back artifacts to Belize. So we now have this agreement with them for that. In terms of the funds. And how we devote effort to this. The anti-looting campaign really picked up as because of this MOU. We made that our part of the agreement that whereas in the US people will look out for artifacts and to prosecute, we have to do our part in Belize by educating people about the laws. And if we find any counterpart for illicit trafficking in Belize to the other part in the US, then we have to prosecute them here. There is difficulty, unfortunately, in trying to prove the artifacts come from Belize. So there is that. But we do work well along with people from like the FBI and the CIA who have come to Belize also to educate the public and also to educate law officials in Belize about the laws of the US and how the laws of the US can work with the laws of Belize to curb illicit trafficking. Anyone else? Okay, how can foreign archaeologists be better integrated with Belizean communities to integrate the findings? One of the issues that someone brought up was that some of the projects that come to Belize have to work under a system of education here, and sometimes if there's all this red tape regarding interacting with the public because you know, certain groups may not want their students to interact or be involved much with the public. So one of the things is that, for example, if NAU has a project going in Belize, let's say under BVAR, then BVAR and NAU can work together to have a sanctioned public component that becomes a requirement. So it's not just done willy-nilly, but it's sanctioned. So these projects can have something like that in place where some kind of public interaction becomes a part of the project, whether it's something like the archaeological fair, whether it's bringing in cultural experts to visit the project and speak about culture in Belize, or whether it's another form of outreach. It all depends on the project and where they are located in Belize. And in regards to integrating their findings, simply visiting a community and talking to the community before you start your project to say, this is who we are, this is what we plan to do, and then maybe in between or after come and say, this is what we found so far, this is what we think it means. It gets the community involved and makes them feel like they are part of the project, and that, you know, and that they matter. It goes a long way. We've had instances in northern Belize, for example, where the police visited a site because someone thought that there was looting, and the students did not have a copy of their permit, and they were shaken up because the police didn't know that this project was working there. So something as simple as that is good, so that the community knows what's going on and don't think that archaeologists or people are looting. This will also go a long way to get rid of that legacy of archaeology in Belize.
Hey, Tony, can I ask another question?
Sure.
All right, awesome. So you talked about the role of, or the importance of archaeologists going out and talking to communities beforehand and saying what they're doing, and kind of during and after, and keeping that conversation going. Do you think, and if so, what role do communities have, not just in being the recipients of archaeological information, but in directing it as well? Does the community have a role there?
That is something that I discussed in my interviews, in terms of the communities having a more hands-on, I guess, role in how these projects are run, and maybe even in what questions are being asked. Unfortunately, I think that is something that requires more research, because it is something that once you open this this can of worms per se, where do you stop? Because how do you balance out what the project wants to know with what the people want? Is it effective? What if they want you to do something that you may think is unethical? What if they want you to destroy a certain structure that you may not want to? So there are a lot of different things that you have to consider when the community itself is very vocal about what the archaeologists do, what research they carry out, what questions they try to answer. I think we can start by just informing them by what's going on. And by doing this, hopefully over time, they get a better sense of what it is that you as the project wants to do. And then they can think of questions that go along with also your research goals, so that it's not very intrusive and also doesn't take away from your goals as the researcher in Belize.
Let me just add something to that question, Sean, because I noticed that there are several, archaeologists, foreign archaeologists that work in Belize that are sort of logging in and listening to the presentation. A good example of that is what we did at the site of Xunantunich. Some years ago, I went to many of the tour guides and say, hey, why don't you come and do what you've done at Calpech at Xunantunich? We really need to do some work at that site. So I went there and I walked around and the tour guides are from the Maya village of San Jose Socot. So, I went with them and I said, well, what kinds of things do you think you'd like to see done here at Xunantunich? And so they pointed that out. Then I went to the Institute of Archaeology and I said, hey guys, they've asked me to go to Xunantunich. What would the Institute like to see us do at Xunantunich? And then, I put that together. And of course, as a Belizean too, I had my own input. And then I said, well, I'm going to see now if I can access the kind of funding, because conservation is not cheap. And I was lucky that I was able to get private funding for the 5 years of conservation work we've done there. But I think that's one way that, foreign archaeologists, and even people like myself who now, works at a foreign institution, is by meeting with the local communities, walking through the sites and asking them, what kinds of things they would like to see us do.
And yes, Sean, Claire's work is very important. I don't think she has published a lot of the work that she has done down there as yet, but I am aware that she has done a lot of heritage work in Belize as well. Oh, there is. Okay, good. I did not see that, but thanks for telling me.
All right, well, why don't we, because it's, we're going on